Elvis Presley died today. He was 42. Apparently it was a heart attack. He was found at his home in Memphis, not breathing. His road manager tried to revive him. He failed. A hospital tried to revive him. It failed.
It was just after 2 in the morning when the phone rang inside a quiet Memphis funeral home, and the man who answered it had no idea he was about to become part of one of the most talked about deaths in American history. He didn't know that his hands would soon touch the body of the most famous entertainer on the planet. He didn't know that decades later, people would still be asking him what he saw that night, what he believed, and what he chose never to say publicly until many years had passed. This is not a story built on rumor for the sake of rumor. It is a story built on decades of documented reporting, official autopsy records, biographies written by respected researchers, and the slow, careful way that some truths only surface long after the world has stopped watching closely. On August 16, 1977, Elvis Presley was found unresponsive in a bathroom at Graceland, his Memphis mansion, by his fiancée at the time, Ginger Alden. Paramedics were called, resuscitation attempts were made in the ambulance and later at Baptist Memorial Hospital, and by early afternoon, the world learned that the king of rock and roll was gone at the age of 42. Within hours, Memphis Funeral Home was contacted to handle the preparation of the body, a routine but solemn responsibility that, in this case, would carry an extraordinary weight. The person tasked with that preparation stepped into a role that placed him closer to the physical reality of Elvis Presley's final hours than almost anyone else alive. For over 3 decades, the embalmer largely stayed out of public commentary, letting biographers, journalists, and medical examiners shape the narrative instead. Author Peter Guralnick, whose meticulously researched book Careless Love, The Unmaking of Elvis Presley remains one of the most respected accounts of Presley's final years, documented in painstaking detail the physical toll that chronic health issues, prescription medication use, and an increasingly isolated lifestyle had taken on the singer's body long before that August morning. Guralnick's work, built on interviews with those inside Presley's circle, painted a picture not of sudden tragedy alone, but of a slow decline that had been building for years, hidden from the public behind stage lights and sold-out arenas in Las Vegas. What made the embalmer's perspective different from a biographer's was proximity. Where writers reconstructed Presley's final days through interviews and second-hand accounts, the person preparing his body witnessed the physical evidence firsthand, before undertakers, medical examiners, and the Presley estate shaped the version of events that would reach the public. That distinction is part of why, when snippets of his recollections eventually surfaced in later interviews and retrospective specials, they carried a different kind of weight. They were not opinions about what might have happened. They were observations about what a trained professional physically saw. The official cause of death, as recorded by Shelby County Medical Examiner Dr. Jerry Francisco in the hours after Presley's passing, was cardiac arrhythmia, a heart rhythm disturbance often associated with cardiovascular disease. This diagnosis was announced publicly with notable speed, before full toxicology results had even been completed, a detail that has been scrutinized by journalists and medical historians for years afterward. It wasn't until later, when more complete toxicology reports were reviewed by other pathologists, including Dr. Eric Muirhead, who had overseen the original autopsy at Baptist Memorial Hospital, that a more complicated picture began to emerge, one involving the presence of multiple prescription medications in Presley's system at the time of his death. This discrepancy between the initial public announcement and the more layered findings that followed has fueled public fascination for decades. It is not, as some sensationalized accounts have claimed, evidence of a hidden crime or a deliberate conspiracy. Rather, it reflects a genuine and well-documented tension within the medical and legal handling of Presley's death, one rooted in competing professional opinions, incomplete information at the time of the initial announcement, and the immense pressure of managing the death of a global icon under intense media scrutiny. Respected journalists covering the case in the years since, including those who worked on documentaries such as HBO's Elvis Presley, The Searcher, have often noted that the full picture of that night was never as simple as either the official statement or the conspiracy theories that followed. It is within this landscape of competing narratives that the embalmer's later recollections take on their significance. According to accounts that circulated in various interviews and retrospective media pieces years after the fact, he described physical details consistent with what has since become widely accepted knowledge, that Presley's body showed signs consistent with a long-term physical strain described by biographers like Guralnick, rather than anything suggesting foul play. These recollections, when examined carefully, tend to support the medical consensus rather than contradict it, even though headlines built around such interviews often implied something more dramatic than the substance actually delivered. That gap between headline and substance is itself part of the story worth understanding. For over 4 decades, Elvis Presley's death has existed in a strange cultural space where sober medical explanation and sensational speculation have been forced to coexist. Tabloids in the years immediately following his death printed claims ranging from staged disappearances to secret government involvement, none of which have ever been supported by credible evidence. Yet within that noise, quieter and more credible sources, funeral home staff, hospital personnel, and medical examiners have offered accounts that, while less dramatic, are arguably more revealing precisely because they align with what is medically documented rather than what is commercially sensational. Understanding why the embalmer waited so long to speak requires understanding the environment surrounding Presley's death in its immediate aftermath. Graceland was, in the days following August 16, 1977, a site of overwhelming public grief. Tens of thousands of fans lined the streets outside the mansion, and Memphis itself became the center of a national outpouring of mourning rarely seen for an entertainer. Within that intensity, funeral home staff and medical personnel involved in handling Presley's body were bound by professional discretion, a norm that governs how morticians and medical staff discuss any deceased individual, let alone one of the most famous people in the world. Speaking publicly about the specifics of what one observed while preparing a body is not simply a matter of personal choice. It intersects with professional ethics, family privacy, and in many cases, legal considerations tied to funeral industry regulations. As the decades passed, however, the passage of time changed the calculus. Many of the people closely connected to Presley's inner circle in 1977, including his father Vernon Presley and personal physician Dr. George Nichopoulos, known widely as Dr. Nick, have since passed away themselves, or their stories have already been thoroughly documented through interviews, court proceedings, and books. Dr. Nichopoulos, in particular, became a central figure in the medical controversy surrounding Presley's death, having faced scrutiny and eventually a Tennessee Board of Medical Examiners hearing over the volume of prescriptions he had written for Presley in the years leading up to 1977, though he was ultimately not stripped of his medical license over the matter at that time. His role, extensively covered by journalists and later addressed in his own memoir, remains one of the most examined threads in the broader story of Presley's decline. Against this backdrop, when someone who handled the physical aftermath finally speaks, even decades later, it inevitably reignites public interest, not because the information radically rewrites history, but because it offers a human, first-hand echo of what has largely already been established through medical and journalistic record. The embalmer's account, as reported in various interviews over the years, has tended to reinforce rather than append the established understanding that Elvis Presley's death was the culmination of years of cardiovascular strain, complicated by the effects of multiple prescribed medications, rather than the result of any single dramatic event or hidden conspiracy. What makes this story endure, then, is not a shocking revelation waiting to be uncovered, but the layered, very human process by which the full truth about any public figure's death comes into focus. Official statements are made quickly, under pressure, often before all the facts are known. Medical examiners revise and refine their understanding as more data becomes available. Biographers spend years piecing together patterns from interviews and records. And those who were physically present in the most intimate final moments of a person's care, funeral directors, embalmers, hospital staff, often carry their observations quietly for years, sharing them only when the emotional and professional weight of doing so finally feels lighter than the silence. In Elvis Presley's case, the convergence of medical record, biographical research, and first-hand testimony paints a picture that is less about scandal and more about the fragility hidden behind extraordinary fame. Here was a man who had reshaped American music, whose voice had carried across generations and continents, and yet whose final years were marked by isolation, physical decline, and a body under far greater strain than most of his fans ever knew. The embalmer who prepared him for burial saw, in that quiet private space, the physical truth of what fame, pressure, and years of health struggles had done to a man the world remembered as eternally youthful on stage. Perhaps that is the deeper significance of stories like this one. They remind us that the public version of a celebrity's life, curated, performed, and often mythologized, rarely tells the whole story. It takes the quiet testimony of doctors, biographers, and yes, even embalmers, patiently offered over decades, to reconstruct something closer to the truth. Elvis Presley's death was not a mystery waiting to be solved by a single revelation 33 years later. It was and remains a deeply human story of talent, excess, isolation, and mortality, one that continues to resonate not because of what was hidden, but because of what it reveals about the cost of a life lived so publicly, and so intensely, in front of the entire world.